Transportation, the globe circle button there. And then if you have any questions during the presentation, we would love for you to put that in the Q&A tab that's at the bottom of your screen. And Tatiana Baena here, who is our Director of Out of School Time, she is going to support just monitoring all those questions and answers, and then helping to see which questions are bubbling up to the top. So there's actually a function, much like Facebook, where you could click the thumbs up to sort of say, yeah, that's a question I have too, so that we can see which questions are being frequently wondered. So we'll try to pause for question and answer at the end of almost every slide, just because it's most important that you all get your questions answered from our time together today. Great.
Dr. Toledo,
Yes.
There is one question before we start about streaming through Google Meet. It says that today's reminder had a Google Meet link and there were some people in that room. So I think it's just a Zoom today, right?
It is a Zoom. Google sometimes does like to throw in their own link. So if anyone knows people in there, if they can direct them back to this Zoom. This is also being recorded, so we'll be sure that this posts, we'll put it up on YouTube and share it with everyone following. Thank you. Okay. So just want to begin this family forum with some gratitude and sharing some of our priorities. So first, I just want to thank everyone who supported the children of Central Falls with distance learning through the spring. All our families, our educators, and the beautiful collaboration that happened across those groups. I am just so impressed and full of appreciation. So I wanted to start with that.
La superintendente quiere comenzar con gratitud y mencionar las prioridades.
Awesome. Millie, I'm going to try to add you in. There should be a way where only those who click Spanish interpretation would hear. Michael, if you can work on that from behind the scenes, that would be much appreciated. If not, we'll do that until we can figure it out. And then next, and very seriously, I want to offer my condolences to everyone who's lost loved ones to this horrible virus. I know that almost everyone at this point has lost someone, but Central Falls obviously was even more hard hit than the rest of the state. And so I offer my sincere condolences to everyone who's grieving. I want to assure you that our top priority is the health and safety of the entire community, students, staff, and families. We'll explore a lot of options today because the Department of Education has asked us to be prepared for many different scenarios, but that doesn't mean that we are definitely going with one or the other. That will all be driven by what the current community spread of the virus looks like when we approach the end of August. I also, while I have a captive audience, want to talk about the best ways to get updates, because nothing will be final on today or even next week or the week after's info sessions. The info is ever changing, and so I want to make sure that people know about different ways where we'll always be sharing information. So there are opportunities where we share district-wide messages. It's through a platform that was previously called Skylert. So you might hear people refer to Skylert messages, where you're either getting a call or a text or an email. We have heard your feedback during the spring that those messages were difficult to understand, and the program didn't always get to every family effectively. And so we've actually made a pivot. So right now we're transferring to a hopefully much more user-friendly platform to reach all our families with stronger translation services and better confidentiality. You're even able to send medical information because it's so secure. So you'll be hearing more about that in the weeks ahead. You can always check our cfschools.net website, and we are building out a specific page on that website just for updates on reopening, and we'll be posting our full plan as soon as RIDE has a chance to finish reviewing it. Our Facebook page is also another place we will always share information. we have an app. Not everyone knows, but you can see a screenshot here to the right. If you go to your app store on whatever device you use and type in Central Falls School District, it's a great way to get notifications of any updates rather than always checking back on the website. So I encourage people to download that app. And then we've created a dedicated email address for any questions you have. So it's safereopen@cfschools.net. Myself and many other members of the team will co-monitor it to try to get you a response as quickly as possible. And so if you have a question and you don't necessarily know who to ask, please reach out at safereopen@cfschools.net. Okay, so now I want to dig into what was expected by the Rhode Island Department of Ed and Department of Health for every district. I think there is a lot of really important questions out there because different districts are sharing their plans at different times. And so wanted to just make sure everyone knew what every district's been asked and clarify that no district knows yet what scenario they will be operating under come the first day of school. You see headlines often, oh, this district's going with a hybrid plan. This district's going to be all in person. And in fact, none of those decisions have been made yet. So the Department of Education said every district needs to be prepared for 4 scenarios. On the far right, the blue would be everybody in person, just like the start of school in 2019 and every year before it. On the far left, in that red, it would be if we all needed to continue with distance learning again, like the spring. And then the Department of Education said, you need 2 more scenarios that fall in between. And they call those limited in person and partial in person. They're very similar, but it all has to do with the rate of spread of the virus. Now, one thing I want to emphasize here is it is going to be the Department of Health that says, as of August 17th, which is the date that they've given us, so just 10 days before our students are scheduled to start, based on the level of community spread, we are going with, and then determine which of those 4 plans we would go with. Now, one thing I want to assure everyone on this forum is that even though the state would prefer to make a statewide decision, they have assured me that if Central Falls community spread of the virus is higher than the rest of the state, that they will consider us differently. And that is an important update since I was last speaking to many of you. So I want you to know that we will continue to advocate that it can't be one size fits all if our community spread of the virus is also, it is different than the rest of the state as it has been thus far. So we're hopeful that those levels drop, of course, on behalf of the community, but if they are not low enough, we expect to be handled differently in terms of which plan would be put into effect. Okay, so I'm gonna pause there to see, Tatiana, do we have any questions that have bubbled up in the Q&A?
Not yet. Just wanted to confirm the email address was safereopen@cfschools.net.
Yes.
Okay. We're just asking about that. So I will put it in the chat for people.
Thank you. So now, using that same color coding, I want to talk a little bit more about how we envision these 4 scenarios in Central Falls. So the full in-person and the full distance learning sort of speak for themselves. Full in-person would be 100% of students would be back in buildings if there was minimal community spread of the virus. And then if there is substantial spread of the virus, then it would be full distance learning like we were in the spring. But if the virus is contained enough that the Department of Health feels that it is safe to return to buildings, but not fully, there are 2 partial plans. What this would look like is if we are just above that minimum spread, so a minimum to moderate, then they would activate the partial in-person plan. In the partial in-person plan, every student from pre-K to 6th grade would be fully in person. So it's very similar to the blue, but there is enough community spread of the virus that they say you can't go full 100%, but we want to get as many kids back in person as possible. Then with limited in person, this means the spread is creeping up again. It's not substantial where we all need to be distance learning, but it is higher than is ideal. In that situation, limited in person, we are told no more than 50% of the students in any school can be there at a given time. So we would activate what we're calling the Central Falls School District Equity Schedule. And based on a student's needs, learning needs, that would determine whether they have 2 in-person days, 2.5 in-person days, or 5 in-person days. Now we realize this creates a lot of different scenarios, but it's done with the goal of ensuring that our students who we saw during distance learning really far benefit from in-person would have the most in-person time. So for example, we have some programs where students are already in a classroom with less than 15 students. So that represents sort of a 50% capacity in a classroom space. Those students would be able to come all 5 days a week in person. So if you're not familiar with those programs, they're IEP driven. So those students have a disability and an individualized education program, such as a self-contained program or our Unified Warriors at the high school. Then every other student who's not in one of those classrooms that's already a reduced size would be put into either group A or group B, and then we would come on alternating days. So group A might come in person on Tuesdays and then be doing distance learning on Wednesdays, come back in person on Thursdays, and then be distance learning on Fridays. That would then be the reverse for group B. Now, for family's sake, and I say this as a mom of 4, so I know when you have children across multiple schools, it can be really challenging. So we are going to do everything we can to align families in either group A or group B. So if you have a student at Ella Risk and Calcut and the high school, we're going to do everything we can to have all of those siblings in the same group so that they would be going to school in person on the same days and then be doing distance learning on the same days. Now that accounts for 4 days, but of course there's a 5th. Currently we're thinking about it as either Monday or Wednesday. There's sort of pros and cons to each, but if we'll say Monday for now. That on that 5th day, or in this case the first day of the week, the 50% of the students in the school that have the greatest learning needs, the greatest need to be in person, would come in, and then the other 50% would be at home doing distance learning. And we're imagining this would probably be a half day where there could be a lot of intervention groups, both in person and distance. And then the second half of the day would be an opportunity for teachers to be collaborating and ensuring that they can continue to grow in this new way of teaching. Now, across the bottom, I'll just say one more thing before I pause for some questions. It says in development across the bottom. And we would like to explore having a distance learning option for everyone whose family felt like that was a strong preference. At this time, the state has not approved districts to run full distance learning options until further notice. So I've heard from a lot of families that they would like to opt into distance learning. And so we are really going to see if we can get that approval. But I just want to be really clear and transparent that at this time, no district in Rhode Island is approved to offer that. The state is working on developing a statewide distance learning option for any students who are medically fragile. But we will continue to explore, based on what we're hearing from you, whether we can have that option for students who have or don't have medical needs, but for your family's choice, you think that that's the right thing for your family. So please do think about that a little bit, because what we're planning to do is have every student in the district receive, every family of a student in the district receive a phone call next week, asking just your current thinking. It's not a final decision, but if we had that option, would you prefer to opt into distance learning or remain with in-person or a hybrid depending on the levels of spread? So we'll be doing that personal outreach to all families in the next week. That will help us also advocate to the state to say, hey, 90% of our families say they want this option or perhaps different, but it's important that we hear your voice and your preference in how we advocate. So I'm going to pause there and see. I can imagine there might be some questions from all that info.
Yes. So the first thing, actually, Dr. Toledo, is to make sure that Millie does have access to interpret, just because it seems like she's a panelist, but may not have access to actually be an interpreter.
Okay. Let's resolve that. I don't see my globe anymore, which is how I set up Felipe. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just for a moment to make sure we resolve that technical issue, because now I see interpretation.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No
I
problem.
just want to make sure families are able to understand.
Manage. Okay. Maybe Rivera M. Okay.
Sí, tenemos interpretación.
Oh, I still hear you, Millie, so I'm going to try it one more
Okay.
time.
Sorry.
No, I love how ready you are. You're amazing. Okay. Millie, you want to try it again? And if I don't hear you, I'll assume you're set up.
Você pode tentar,
Uh-oh.
e se eu não ouvir?
Buenas tardes.
Everyone's getting it in all 3 languages now. Add interpreter, Rivera M, Spanish, update. Okay, I think we're good to go. Maybe run a test, our interpreters. Okay.
Sounds like
Don't
that might be
hesitate
working.
to interrupt if that keeps popping in as a concern, because we want to make sure we get that right. Okay.
And then we have one question, a clarifying question. It says, so if the Department of Education says we go with full in-person learning, is that what CF will be doing? And if the district can't choose themselves, what plan do they plan on going with?
Oh, great question. So we don't have a firm answer on this. I'll say that. If our community spread was low enough and aligned with the state levels, which it hasn't been, right? So we shouldn't make that assumption. If we were at the same lower levels as the rest of the state, and the state said we would be fully in person, then we would. If the rest of the state is fully in person, but our levels are higher than the rest of the state, the Department of Health and the Department of Education has said they will look at us differently. So my best hypothesis of how this is going to play out, my best guess, is Central Falls will be operating under a different plan, but that is not going to be, no one is saying that with any certainty until they see what our community spread levels are much closer to the start of school, because they actually look at it in sort of week increments, week by week. And so, of course, on behalf of the community, we hope that we keep seeing those levels go down and down. And because we're still a full month and a few days from the start of school, the Department of Health and Department of Education do not want to make that decision of which plan, nor whether Central Falls would be handled differently yet. So hopefully that clarifies, even though it doesn't give a definitive answer. And then the second part of the question around, like, if we got to pick, what would we pick? We don't get to pick, unfortunately. Like, we don't get to make that decision, but my recommendation, if we were starting school today, if we were fast forwarding a month, would be to start with distance learning. I'm going to be quite honest. Based on the data that I have, and talking with medical professionals in our community, I would not recommend a full in-person start with the current spread. Again, hoping and praying that that drops on behalf of the health of the people in Central Falls. But that would be my personal recommendation. But that's not, since I didn't go to medical school, my doctorate is in education, not in medicine. I am not the person who will make that decision.
And then a follow-up question on that is, if we cannot find out until the 17th, why not delay the start just slightly so we can really get ready for school?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is one that's really interesting. I've actually had a few press inquiries on this because we are scheduled to start on the 27th. So what RIDE and RIDO said is that you need to start by the 31st, but you could start earlier. And in fact, we recommend it so that you can get as many learning days in before flu season and or a second wave of the virus. So they actually are encouraging people to start sooner. That said, if the decision's not made, there is no question that those 10 days will be incredibly busy, to put it like gently. But that's the reason we've been asked to create all 4 plans. We're even going down to the level of having bus routes for different plans and every detail that might need to be worked out. But you're right, whoever is asking this question, that there will be incredible ripple effects once that decision is made in terms of staffing, budgeting, how you set up to teach. Like every single bit of how we run a district will have to adjust based on which plan we have to put in place. That said, I heard someone, it's an older reference, but someone said to me, you have to be like Gumby and be pretty much as flexible. I don't know if you remember the green Gumby character, but the way that we are being advised as superintendents is that we should be prepared to move across these 4 scenarios pretty flexibly throughout the whole school year because of how unknown things are with the virus. So even if we start in person or start virtual, that does not mean it's a decision for the 180 days of the school year, but rather the decision based on the data on that given day. So I think it's also, important to note that if you're a student who is in a class where a child were to get the virus, we would then need to quarantine every student in that class and the teacher or any adult who's working with that class. And so there might be 2 weeks where you are doing distance learning, even if the rest of the district is in the limited in person, the partial in person, or even the full. So that's why the Department of Education has asked us to be as flexible and as nimble as possible to move between the 4 plans. It's going to be a tough year.
Sounds like it. Dr. Toledo, we have another question. When will you know if you will be recalling teachers?
Great question. Every day I hope to make this decision. So as folks know or don't, that decision was made because of purely impacts to our budget due to the pandemic. We want these teachers. We believe our students need the learning that these teachers provide. So I want to be super clear on that. What makes that challenging is, even though as of July 1st, we entered this new fiscal or money year, because the calendar runs July to June, we still don't have a budget. So I think people are surprised, saying, but it's the new money year. How do you not have a budget? The state doesn't have their budget set because they're waiting and hoping for a lot more funds from the federal government. And so we're hoping it'll be worth the wait. But at this time, we are being given sort of a month by month allowance, or I don't know the better way to put it, but like we get this like portion to make sure we can pay the bills of the district, but we do not know what our full budget for the 12 months will be, even though we're already almost a month into that 12 months. until then, it's really challenging to know whether we will have the money to bring all of those teachers back. It is my commitment to do something every single day to make it happen. And so I want you to know that that happens every day, and that those conversations, that commitment is shared by so many people in the district and on the board. But at this time, we haven't been able to make that decision because we're still looking at a potential $4 million deficit. Other
Thank you. That was
questions, or should I?
So there's actually a couple of questions that all relate to the same thing, which is
Okay.
around how, like, will we ensure student safety in the buildings? Will they be required to wear masks? Will they get the cleaning supplies that they need, etc.?
Great question. So you may have heard of the CARES Act, but there's some money that the federal government has provided to make sure that we have funds to get some of those essential supplies. So even though a minute ago I was saying we don't know yet about the money needed for those teachers, there is money that ensured that we could order supplies that we needed to keep the buildings super clean and take all those safety measures. So as an example, if we're in person, we need to be prepared with the best level of cleaning that we have ever put into place. So our director of operations ordered what to me look a little bit like a Ghostbuster backpack with the sprayer, and they are electromagnetic sprayers that can clear and clean every surface and do a classroom in less than a minute. We made sure to order enough for every school to have one, so that every day we can do a level of cleaning that is considered a deep clean. So while we hear other districts saying we're committed to doing a deep clean once a week, we're taking it daily. Every day, every school will be deep cleaned. We know that even that's not sufficient. So we have also ordered the supplies such that there is, I believe it's a gallon hand sanitizer per classroom per month. So we're talking about swimming pools worth of hand sanitizer, wipes. Students will be eating in their classrooms to our best at this time, based on the requirements of not bringing different groups together. Most likely, at least in elementary, students would eat breakfast and lunch in the room. So we also want to make sure we have the cleaning supplies that as students are eating, we can also clean within the day. So those are just some of the measures. Students will be strongly encouraged to wear masks. As we know from sort of the national conversation, that can't be required, but strongly encouraged. And we've got a lot of creative teachers thinking about what are the ways to make that exciting for students, and even have some student-led groups who are thinking of some different student-led campaigns to talk about the importance of mask wearing amongst their peers. I do want to also just note, even though this wasn't exactly the question, when I was talking about that CARES Act funding, something that we're really excited to have been able to do with the CARES Act money. So this money can only be used for things that are needed due to the pandemic. The thing that we heard from families, from teachers, from students themselves that was the biggest hurdle to distance learning was that we did not have enough Chromebooks. And so we have ordered enough Chromebooks, new Chromebooks, not 7-year-old Chromebooks, but new Chromebooks for every student in the district. And so we are excited that that will hopefully remove a lot of the barriers that were in place for distance learning for the spring. So that was one of the ways that we invested that special COVID money.
Okay, there's a lot of questions. Do you want to continue with the questions, or do you
I
want to?
think questions are the way to spend the time.
Yeah.
The rest of the slides, and I can post these on the website. The goal of the slides was to be sort of a summary of a 50-page document with 100 links within. And so I can post this on the website, share it on our Facebook page, but let's keep taking questions.
Okay. So there was a question about who exactly will be cleaning, because there are some, medical conditions that may prevent folks from, like teachers, from doing the cleaning themselves. So there was a question about that.
Yeah,
Couple of
great
folks about
question. So at this time, the cleaning is being done by, we contract with a company for our custodial services. And so that team will be doing it. We are trying to figure out whether we might need to increase the number of custodial, but to be quite honest, that is not that's a tension for me because I want to bring back our teachers. And so, we're having to really weigh some tough decisions of how do we ensure that there's enough people to keep the buildings clean and safe, but also, bring back people who are already on the team. So all that to say, teachers are not expected to clean. There's certainly, we're going to make things available. I know when I was a classroom teacher, I would always take the option of wiping down tables when I could, just because I often, that helped keep me healthy. Obviously, this is non-pandemic context that I'm referring to. So we wouldn't stop a teacher if they chose to use the supplies we provided to do more cleaning. But those more intense, like the sprayers and the Ghostbuster backpacks I referenced, things like that would be done by the professional cleaning service company.
Okay, and then there's some technology questions like access to Chromebooks, in terms of like, will students be receiving Chromebooks from the district, and then will staff also be able to receive Chromebooks from the district, especially the support staff that may not, have access to technology themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't want to misspeak. So as many of you may know, I was on maternity leave. I had a baby during the pandemic. So I am actually just 2 weeks back full-time. There was an amazing team handling things, and I would be involved in a lot of decisions, but whether the order of new Chromebooks included every staff member, I need to check on. So I don't want to misspeak on that. But I know there are sufficient Chromebooks for every student. So I will circle back with staff and can send an update on that one.
Cool. There's also a question, well, actually a follow-up to that. Oh man, I lost it. In terms of materials, like, will teachers and students be receiving materials for distance learning? Should that be the option that, like supplies and things like that? Should
Yeah,
that be the option that we take?
Such good questions. And I would say the details of all these plans are still works in progress. So we have many subcommittees. We've got a teaching and learning subcommittee at elementary and at secondary. We've got, that's just one example, but all these subcommittees that have representation of teachers and try to bring whatever voices are most important to what decisions are being made to the table. They're thinking through some of those decisions. So I know there's certainly, as an example, been some brainstorming around materials beyond just a Chromebook for some of our youngest students. So how we could ensure there was sort of a at-home supply kit, if you will, of those materials that might be needed for learning for that grade band. We also are exploring with each of our current curriculum partners. So for example, we partner with a company called the American Reading Company for our literacy materials. And in fact, we got a very significant grant, almost $1 million, to ensure we could get high quality literacy materials into every classroom. But if we're not physically in classrooms, we did go to the company and say, hey, what can you do and work with us to ensure that the high quality curriculum is still accessible? And so a lot of these vendors, at the same pace that we're all doing this since March, have been trying to figure out how to make more of the tools that would have been in a classroom accessible virtually. So wherever possible, with our American Reading Company partner, with Eureka Math is another partner. We're trying to build some of their virtual tools into our packages for this year. So don't have all the details for every grade of what that will look like, but it is something we are certainly trying to figure out, so that regardless of what physical setting a student is learning in, that they have what they need.
And then like how often or how frequently will the situation be monitored to determine like if we're going to be in person or not? And then how much time would teachers and staff, like how much heads up would they receive?
Ooh, let's hope a little more than on March 13th, right? But probably not much more. So I think we have to operate as though those decisions could change on a daily basis. And I know that is so hard to hear, especially as a parent who, you know, if you're a working parent, those are the things that are keeping me up at night, certainly, of like, what happens if my own kids get quarantined because one of their classmates is sick and I need to be, you know, at work. And so I know that's not an answer that's easy to hear, but those shifts could happen on a daily basis. If someone gets the virus, anyone who's been in contact with, so in their classroom or the adults that work with that classroom, they would be quarantined. One of the things we're getting clarification on from the Department of Health is if you have a negative COVID test, can you then return, or do you still need to quarantine for 2 weeks? There's been different guidance on that, and so we're gonna make sure to get real clarity. Hopefully everyone knows that the city, you know, did an incredible job of creating an opportunity right across the street from Ella Risk on Dexter Street, where anyone who lives in Central Falls or works in Central Falls can get free COVID tests. So we're hoping that the testing is widely available should a situation like that occur. But you know, the short answer to the question is we would have to pivot quickly. So I'd be taking my Chromebook to and from work every day. That's for sure.
Okay, and so with that, there's some questions about vaccinations and about students coming in without potentially having the proper vaccinations. And so how will we be monitoring that and making sure that students are receiving the shots that they need before they enter school?
Okay, so that one seems very specific. So I want to, you know, there might, when it comes to things medical, I want to make sure that, you know, we're getting the guidance from a medical professional. The same expectations for the vaccines that exist, right? Like COVID doesn't have a vaccine. So obviously we, in a dream world, that would make all of this a lot easier. But the regulations haven't changed for the other vaccines, if that's the question. If that individual, whoever posed that, wants to send that that new email address, safereopen@cfschools.net, I can get you connected with a medical professional to answer that for your specific situation. Because of course there are some students for religious reasons or otherwise who don't necessarily follow the same vaccination schedule. But because there's so many nuances to that, I don't want to make a blanket statement on that one.
Yeah, there were a couple of questions around that, as well as will there be, you know, funds available through the CARES Act for full-time nurses in each school?
So our nurses were part of the group, unfortunately, that were laid off back in May. And so, yeah, we feel the urgency to get all of them back as well. And to the question of in each building, it's something we are definitely exploring, because for any educator who, or you know, any staff person who used to go between two buildings, which we used to have a lot of, especially across our two smaller schools, Raices and Hunt, we are going to need to rethink all of that in order to minimize the cross spread of of a potential case of the virus. So more detail on that as we're trying to map it out. These are the kinds of things we do sort of share to the state that have, those are the ripple effects I was sort of talking about, of whether we're in each of these plans, how that would be handled. But the goal of having a full-time nurse is certainly there in each building.
And then there was questions about your slides. And if there was any of this information that we were talking about in your slides, just to help people kind of digest it a little bit better and understand. Not sure if there is, but.
Yeah, so the slides follow, and thanks to Millie, are translated in English and Spanish. So we'll make sure these are posted for anyone who wants to spend more time with them. Wanted to make sure people knew that we're really operating around the principle of nothing about us without us. We have been having focus groups and surveying and inviting people to be on subcommittees of the planning. I know not every person is necessarily in one, has shared their voice in one of those ways. And so we want to keep inviting that feedback. But to us, it's really important that those who are going to be affected by this plan are shaping the plan. I've sort of spoken to the priorities and the vision, but can just sort of also share that we feel, I'm scanning my own slides to make sure, I think I've hit on many of these and don't want to be redundant because our time together is obviously precious, but we also see an opportunity where since everything's sort of been shaken down to its studs, if you will, to rebuild in ways that we believe will be more equitable and drive towards our goals of, excellent learning experiences for every kid in Central Falls. And so we want people to know that even though there is urgency to create plans and move quickly, that we are trying to slow down enough to say, let's just not race back to the way things were, because that wasn't working for us enough, right? And so I want to, thank the co-collaboration of the union, the board, the district. Everyone came together for that rally not too long ago. Like, we are committed to working together with families to push on things that have historically not been right on behalf of Central Falls schools. And so whether it's funding formulas or policies, whatever we can rebuild in a more equitable way, we want people to know that that's our intention. So even something like ensuring every student has access to a Chromebook. So those are the shifts that hopefully people will be experiencing as we sort of rebuild and reopen. Through those initial slides, I think we did really hit on a lot of these guiding principles, but because so many decisions are being made on a dime, whether it was the March 13th moment and everything that has followed, as a district, I want to assure everyone that I'm committed to ensuring that our values are at the core of when we have a hard time making a decision, we come back to, well, what would it be? What would be the decision that values equity, empowerment, and excellence? And so hopefully you're already experiencing that. If you're not, call us out on it. If, I know some families have reached out and said, I'm so grateful to have, been able to voice my opinions through a focus group or a survey, but I'm sure we know we haven't reached every family in that way. And so if you have feedback for us on how do we reach more families in a way that works for families to get their input, let us know, because we really believe in those values as not just words on a logo, but how we live out the work that we're doing. The plan itself had 4 sections. So this is what was required by the Rhode Island Department of Education. So we'll share the full plan as soon as RIDE gives us the AOK. So we submitted a plan to RIDE on Friday, just less than a week ago, that had health and safety, instruction, social emotional supports, and then reopening operations. And we needed within each of those sections to talk about what it looked like across all 4 plans. So the slides that follow really just try to give you a high level overview of each of those sections. Some of the questions already came in about masks. We didn't talk explicitly about social distancing, but it sort of came through maybe when I was talking about meals, but to the greatest extent possible, students will really only be in, some people are using the term pod, but a group that is, for the most part, contained. So recess as we once knew it, lunch as we once knew it, those opportunities where you might go spend time with a friend who has another teacher, those opportunities will not be there this school year for the safety of everyone. The hope is that those stable groups can minimize the spread of the virus as much as possible. And then the Department of Health is coming out with what they're calling the RIDO playbook. We have not seen it yet. I know that they had put one out for early childhood centers and providers this summer, and they were trying to sort of learn from that, but that will sort of be the guide, the playbook for how we respond to a positive case or, God forbid, an outbreak of the virus. So a lot more to that as we get the guidance ourselves. I'll pause there. Any more questions on health and safety or other topics?
Just around like how the groupings will work. So like how are we going to ensure that we can socially distance pre-K students and kindergarten students? Mm-hmm. There was something around dual language programs when students receive instructions from 2 different teachers. Or like, will they have the same teacher, or how will that work? So just more around the grouping and how will we ensure that students are socially distancing and stuff like that.
Yeah, great questions. So to speak to like the Raices specific question, those, because of the core design of that learning experience, those groups of students would still have 2 teachers at the pre-K up to the 3rd grade level. 4th, 5th, and 6th at Raices has 1 teacher. So those groups would almost be like one cohort in that the students wouldn't mix, but because they are exposed to both teachers, if a student in the 1st grade class, both cohorts would likely have to quarantine because the teacher had been in both. So that looks a little different in terms of the quarantining process. But again, these are the exact same questions we're asking the Department of Health to give us clarity on. So we're anticipating some of that comes out in this playbook. But a lot of we're operating with whatever information they've given us, but also pausing when we don't have an answer from a health professional, because we're not making this up and pretending like, whatever I heard on the news last night is going to be the way we'll handle it. So I want to assure you that we're only operating with guidance from the medical professionals on how to respond to any sort of positive case. Yeah.
Okay, then there were a couple of questions regarding ventilation and air quality, like monitoring due to the windows in some of the schools and not being able to open and get fresh air and stuff like that. So a couple of questions around ventilation and how that would be cleaned.
Really important questions. Multiple buildings have classrooms without windows. Our district office is in a basement with no windows. So these are things that we have been certainly like exploring. And our director of operations has been doing a lot of tests. The guidance here has changed quite a bit, right? It's like at one point ventilation was good. Then the next week it was bad because it was actually pushing the virus around. And so no fans. It's like, but we don't have AC. So I want you to know we are considering all of this. and updating our plans as we get more clear guidance from the Department of Health. The vent question comes up a lot, especially at the high school. So I just want to name that that is being looked into by professionals who do vent work. That is not my area of expertise, but I'm staying on top of making sure that those checks are happening.
Okay, and then there's a couple of questions from teachers around, and I don't know if, this is more of something we would answer internally, but it was more around like their sick time and will they need to be using sick time to quarantine and for COVID tests and stuff like that?
Great question. If you are not sick, then you do not need to use sick time. So if you are, and we've had this happen where we've had to have an individual quarantine because they either traveled somewhere or maybe at a second job were exposed to the virus. Like those were some of the situations that happened in the spring. If you were expected to quarantine to the greatest extent possible, you did your work remotely, and that obviously changes by role what that looks like. But you did not have to take sick time if you were mandated to quarantine. If you get the virus and are sick and not working, then that is sick time. Yeah.
And then there were some questions regarding teacher families and if their children also had hybrid plans that kind of differed from their plans.
Yeah, such a good question. So hopefully every staff member I sent an email just last night with a 4-question survey that sort of, that drives at a lot of the questions that I think are coming out here. So we do want to know if you have a situation where you do not plan to physically return to the building, whether it's something related to you or people you live with or care for, that survey is the best way to note that, and then someone from HR can reach out and sort of have a conversation about your specific scenario. Yeah. I know we blocked an hour and we're coming up on that right now. So I want to let people know a couple things. One, I will continue to have these forums as long as people are interested in having that opportunity to ask more questions. So I'm happy to do these as frequently as needed. There's another one at 5:30, same slides, but again, open Q&A. All of them will be recorded and shared, but I don't, I also, we're developing some FAQ documents. I'm trying to be sensitive to the fact that there is so much information flying at everyone that it's hard to even keep track. Or at least that's my experience as I get the documents from the Department of Ed and Department of Health. It's all critical information, but it can feel overwhelming. So we will work to send updates weekly to make sure that you have the most current information that we have, because a lot of this changes quite regularly. And so we'll be sure to be sending those updates weekly or more often if needed as we continue the planning process. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Tatiana, for managing the Q&A chat. Thank you to Millie and Felipe for interpreting for everyone. And thank you to the 115 people who joined and are clearly so committed to wanting the best for your children, whether they are your children as a parent or your children as one of their educators. So thank you all.